Hey everyone, welcome back. And today I'm going to show you a museum about Rosie the Riveter. And she was not actually a real person. It was more of a propaganda campaign to get women involved during World War II and help the war campaign and build planes and build ships and weld and do all those things that men that were off at war would normally do. So there's actually a museum here in Richmond, California. So let's go check it out. And just a little side note, if you guys like what I'm doing, I got over 100 videos on my channel, so check them all out. And let's go check out the Rosie the Riveter Museum.
talks about how this town of 23,000 people went to a town of 130,000 people in 4 years.
Wow.
And it shares some of the issues. Richmond was a very different town. It was everyone had jobs. We had 1899, the Santa Fe Railroad ended, but Western Terminal is in Richmond.
Right.
The next year, Rockefeller comes out, and his private car, stays in Richmond. He takes a boat to the city every day.
Okay.
But he buys land because of the deep water port in Richmond. He also builds a hunting lodge because he said it's like living in Italy. Well, he never came back. The hunting lodge is still around.
Wow.
It's an events place now. The concept of building ships, and Kaiser shipyards and Marin Ship are the only places that ever used this concept of prefabbing welding. Even today, ships are built one sheet of steel at a time, riveted together, which is why it takes 40 years.
So they adopted like an assembly line type?
So you'll see that they adopted assembly. So this gentleman, his father said, you have to go make your own money. His name was Stephen Beckville Jr., Beck family. And he came to Richmond because it had a deep water port, and the man who owned the port, Fred Parr, was willing to, they had land that they could build ships on easily. There was a contract to build 30 cargo ships. They just needed one more thing, and that was some financing. And so the city did their part, and then they brought in this guy named Henry J. Kaiser. And the rest is history.
Okay.
We built 747 ships in Richmond, faster than any, and our ships were, I'm going to get this backwards, I know, were completed 75% faster and 80% cheaper than every place else. I mean, it worked.
Because of the assembly line.
Because of the assembly line, because all the pieces were there.
Well, they had the Ford plant right there to copy, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was very different.
Right.
You'll see the pictures, the movies of the shipyard, so.
And Mare Island was pumping out ships too, right?
Mare Island built, there were shipyards around the bay. There were 7, I think. Mare Island only built submarines.
Oh, okay.
They were very specialized ships.
Yeah, my wife's grandfather built submarines there. Okay. But I didn't know they only built submarines.
Yes, well, they may have built a few little carriers.
Right.
But they were a submarine.
Not like this.
And when we didn't build aircraft carriers, and we didn't build battleships, we built cargo ships.
Okay, cargo ships.
Because they make jeeps here, we put them on the ship and send them to Europe or send them to the Pacific front. They would they'd build a ship here, take it right up the bay to a place called Port Chicago. Okay. Where from Hastings, Nebraska and Nevada, trainloads every day of munitions kept pouring in. And they would go from the train cars.
Port Chicago's up by Benicia, right? I think so.
It's on it's on the Contra Costa side.
Yeah.
Concord.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yes, and it's one of our 4 parks in Contra Costa County, 4 National Historical Parks.
It was a beautiful little city. I fell in love with it.
Everything was wide open and rough and wild.
The conditions for growing are really, really good in Richmond. Lots of sunlight, and it's not too hot.
It's kind of a combination of industry and semi-rural landscape that most people remember. They would have vegetable gardens and a cow tethered out behind their home and walk up to McDonald Avenue to do their shopping.
Richmond was a working man's town. You had the Pullman coach refurbishing factories there.
Standard Oil, the railroad, and later the Ford Assembly Building. Kind of a working class community.
You had a diversity of ethnicities and races living in Richmond. Italian Americans and African Americans, the Japanese American population, Chinese population. Native American, Indian population, as well, of course, as Mexican American. Kaiser plant located there before Pearl Harbor. Richmond had a really good deepwater harbor, perfect for the shipping industry. It had lots of open space. It also had a working force.
The attack yesterday on the Hawaiian Islands has caused severe damage.
It was absolute horror. We were in total shock and terror because we were being told immediately that we might be bombed, and we had to immediately go into blackout mode.
When we got into the war, there was a big demand. We had to have ships, we had to have everything. I heard on my car radio, women, do something for your country. Go to the Richmond shipyard and be a welder. I had not the faintest idea what it was. I just knew that it was something that they needed done real bad, and I decided that that's what I was going to do.
Loaded that suitcase, got it on a train and came to California and stayed with my sister, Caroline.
We all thought we could make money working in the shipyards. Father was the type of man that looked for better jobs, and he wanted me with him.
Henry J. Kaiser, you know, he brought a lot of people back from the South to work in the shipyard.
For African American Southerners, the most frequently given graduation gift was not a watch or a typewriter, but a train or bus ticket out to the West.
In 2 years, little Richmond of 23,000 had become a bustling metropolis of 130,000. This fabulous growth necessitated civic expansion.
Richmond's population exploded physically, but also in terms of cultural and social and even political differences that made living together and working together a challenge.
I remember always sleeping in crowded conditions.
There wasn't enough housing for anybody.
Some were living in a truck, some living in a car. Everybody was taking in roomers. I had a roommate. I worked swing shift. She worked graveyard. We slept in the same bed.
That way I could sleep in the daytime and they could sleep in the bed at night. In downtown Richmond was just seething with people.
Lots of people on the streets. I mean, like 4th of July or like Cinco de Mayo.
Grocery stores were open 24 hours. Everything was open 24 hours a day during that time.
Everything was moving. The energy was everywhere.
You had clubs like Minnie Lou's Restaurant and Blues Club in North Richmond. And then there was, of course, this enormously popular club called Tapper's Inn. It was a nightclub, a blues club, and they had sort of in the back room the slot machines and card games and things like that.
It was a busy, happening, good town. People had jobs, and there was
optimism, and there was an energy. In addition to the shipyards, there were 55 other defense-related industries in Richmond, so there were workers moving in all directions. Everybody was working towards the same goal. We wanted to bring the boys home.
I went to the hiring hall, and they said, you have to join the Boilermakers Union. So I went there, and this man, stern, big, and said, we don't take any women or blacks. The next day, I went back to the hiring hall, and they gave me the same story, and I started crying. And there was a man sitting at a desk, and he says, go back up there. And they hired me.
But then when they brought in the women, oh my land, the men laughed at them terribly at first.
There were tensions in the workplace that related to both race and gender. There were people who said, I'm not going to work with a black person, and there were men who said, I'm not going to work alongside a woman. So we talk about unity during World War II, but there were lots and lots of bridges that had to be built.
In the case of Kaiser, the labor unions, particularly the Boilermakers Union, began reluctantly to accept first women and then African Americans, men and women. The momentum to challenge Jim Crow that really launched the modern civil rights movement grew out of the WWII campaign that African Americans pushed for victory over the enemies abroad, but also over Jim Crow at home. The Pittsburgh Courier really was behind launching this campaign for African Americans to challenge and defeat segregation, discrimination based on race, in housing, in the workplace, in schools.
I went to Richmond High and was taught welding. And I worked at Kaiser's, but I never worked side by side with on the same ship with a man welding.
I'll tell you what, the women were the best welders. If you give the woman the job she does and does that job, until it's done right.
It was like creating an embroidery in metal. I can point out that was a man's weld, and that was a woman's weld, because they look different. The men's isn't as uniform.
We worked for hours, and we did twice work the men did.
A new world shipbuilding record is set at one of Henry J. Kaiser's California shipyards. 24 days ago, just a keel plate.
Henry Kaiser was a genius. He started one of the first health plans, and he started a place for people to live and things that people didn't have before.
He developed the child care centers to accommodate the children needing care while their parents were at work.
And here's the man who builds them in record time. Henry J. Kaiser with a model to show how it's done. Built to scale, the 14-foot model is made of 81 feet.
Everything was prefabbed under Kaiser, where they had the big sheets of steel and they weld those together and then move them by crane onto the ships.
We call them the Horley cranes. They were so enormous, and they would lift these massive pieces of metal and boxes, and they were just one of the biggest things I'd ever seen.
And that's how come ships could be built so fast. Parts would be welded together and ready to be put onto a ship in no time.
Our motto was 10 down the ways in 31 days.
Down the ways. They would slide that ship down into the San Francisco Bay.
Rain or shine, ships quietly slipped into San Francisco Bay faster and faster. By the fall of 1943, more than one ship a day left Richmond. Most colossal shipbuilding spectacle the world had ever witnessed.
They were always giving speeches and telling us how the other yards, how fast they were getting a ship built. So There was always competition.
And I remember when we worked on the Robert Peary, which was built, by the way, I think it's, the record has it either 3.5 or 4.5 days from beginning to finish. And I think that's an amazing team.
The launchings at Yard 1 and 2 were particularly festive occasions. They got famous people from all over the country. Ship would go sliding down the ways right after the champagne was cracked over the bow. Very ceremonial.
It was a patriotic time. You'd see the kids collecting newspapers, collecting tinfoil, collecting anything. Women, they gave up all their girdles, all their underwear that had elastic.
It really was the most wonderful time of coming together of the American people that I have ever lived through.
It wasn't as if the shipyards closed and some balloon burst and Richmond was depopulated. It really continued to be a thriving community.
Today, I think you have waves of newcomers who have that kind of vibrancy that those newcomers during the wartime had. Richmond, it was called the city that won the Purple Heart because of the amount of change and crowding in the war effort and turning out those ships in record numbers. Something happened in the small town of Richmond that people should be very proud of.
I was very proud of myself that I worked in the shipyards. Proud of myself because I thought we were doing something for the war effort.
From that point on, I always thought, I can do anything I want to do. If I set my mind to it, I can do anything. And that's how I've lived the rest of my life.
This was the place to be. What sticks with me the most was how wonderful everybody was to each other. Very patriotic and pulling together, and it was just a good time.
That's what makes the story so interesting, that these were ordinary people who did extraordinary things.
riveting down here. Not too loud. I thought it would be louder actually. Interesting. Sounds like a machine gun cutter. Here's a little demo here. It says how to build a ship. Well, this building here that we're staring at right now is the Ford building, and they produced most of the Jeeps during the war, and right now they just use it for various things, functions. Take a look at the big building. You can see the cranes that they use for all the assembly and everything. So this whole building will build tanks and jeeps and other things for the war effort. See the railroad tracks right here. It goes down quite a ways. It's a huge factory. And the ships are docked here. Way off there you can see Oakland, San Francisco, Alcatraz straight ahead, Angel Island. Let's go see, there's some pictures of the Ford factory building here. So yeah, look, here's the inside of that building I just showed you. Some of the various cars they made in that building, the Ford building. So I'm on this corner right here. So this crane, these railroad tracks, this crane when it rolled on. So this is right where I am. So I guess these here were for cranes, maybe trains too, to load up. Probably, actually, I think the crane would load the train. So these tracks on the end here are probably for the crane that would load the train. It was abandoned, the whole building. And then they came and rebuilt it. Put some energy into it. Gave it some love. And now it's like this instead of like that. You see this part right here? That's right there. So they did a lot of work to redo this. They had to replace all that glass and everything. Here's a view looking from the other end all the way down. So I don't know if you can see on the right and the left, you see that big bar with the curtains hanging? That thing would roll. It's a motorized on tracks, and that was a crane also. They could roll things back and forth. So in the back of the museum here, they even have their own little victory garden. Cilantro, tomatoes, radish, looks like squash, carrots or artichokes. This is a memorial to Rosie the Riveter, and it's about a mile away from the museum. I wasn't going to come here, but I decided to come here since I was in the area. And it looks like it's just like a piece of a ship with various pictures. There's a different women that built the ships. Look at the penmanship people have had. A memorial to Rosie the Riveter, basically women that worked in World War II. (1940) women in the workforce 10 million. 1945 women in the workforce 18 million. It almost doubled. Well, that was pretty interesting to learn all those things at the Rosie the Riveter Museum and this Ford assembly plant right behind me that made tanks. And most of the Jeep effort, the Jeeps during the war, came out of this same building here. So it's really interesting. I learned a lot about the particular area, the Bay Area, that I didn't know. And the view here is quite nice, as you can see. But thanks again for coming along with me on my journey today. I appreciate it. You know, I have more videos you guys can watch on my channel. And if you enjoy what I'm doing, please hit that subscribe button, leave me any comments, thumbs up, and I'll see you on my next journey. Okay, thanks again.